India Legal, stories that count.
Hello and welcome to another special readout from India Legal magazine. As you know, we are the nation's first political legal independent weekly focusing on controversial issues of national and international importance. The video readouts we present to you regularly are the editorial team's choice of the most significant stories we believe should receive close scrutiny and wide circulation. You can watch them along with the visuals or listen to them as you would a podcast. Now, in this week's readout, we focus on a subject that has become the subject of this decade's most controversial debates: the regulation and control of the social media. Now, these websites and portals, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Coup, Instagram, well, you name them, are both a bane and a boon. A boon as an alternative to government and corporate controlled traditional media outlets, and a bane as well of yellow journalism and smear campaigns and viral disinformation. But do they need to be chained and controlled? Then what about free speech and the right to access to the public for disseminating information that someone is trying to hide? Now, I'm summing up the dilemma in a bare bones fashion here. A more thorough and thoughtful analysis comes to us from Ashit Kumar Srivastav, Assistant Professor of Law at Jabalpur's National Law University. What follows is a readout from his latest article in India Legal magazine. Srivastav points out that in order to avoid stringent regulatory action by governments across the globe, websites are making their community standards and artificial intelligence methods more elaborate and their content moderation more strict. Recently, Twitter India filed a writ petition in Karnataka's High Court challenging the orders given by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology for taking down content under the provisions of the Information Technology Act of 2000. The matter is still pending before the court of law, thus it is sub judice. However, from a jurisprudential perspective, says Professor Srivastav, there are larger questions underlying these tussles. Incidences like these have not been raised for the first time, and surely are not an example of a rookie war between a private player and deep state trying to over-regulate. Rather, it has turned into a more seasoned and sophisticated war between two well-versed warriors who are not ready to surrender in the battlefield. As Srivastav notes, the seeds of the battle were first sown in 2016 when Facebook was questioned over its role in the 2016 US presidential election, famously known as Facebook Cambridge Analytica case. 6 years after that incident, governments across the globe are trying to regulate the working of social media websites. There are diverse perspectives from which the websites are being governed, one aspect being data protection. Now, social media websites are seen as predators who will capture the personal data of their audiences and use it to micro-target them by manipulating their choices. Now, the other aspect, says Srivastav, is to govern the content posted on social media websites, under which the audience uses the neutral wall of the website to post content which is less than desirable, such as hate speech, obscene content, misinformation and disinformation. All this content has the capacity of distorting the harmonious ambience, or at least the harmonious ambience that all good governments and civilized societies try and create, the ambience, the harmonious ambience of society. Websites are not held liable to till a particular time, as they are merely intermediaries. However, If the content continues to stay on their page after a particular time, as prescribed, actually it's a particular time period as prescribed in the regulations, the websites will not be regarded as intermediaries, but held liable as if the content has been posted by them. These kinds of regulatory frameworks across the globe have brought about massive changes within these websites and altered relations between governments and social media intermediaries. Now, in order to avoid the stringent regulatory measures of governments, these websites have been making their community standards more elaborate and extensive, and their artificial intelligence driven content moderation more strict. Interestingly, even after this, there have been several instances when questions have been raised on the neutrality of the content posted on the social media websites, with allegations that they have kept certain kinds of content immune from moderation, or the moderation mechanism is not adequate to address all the issues. Now, in this mix, when the Indian government made content regulation rules with adequate punishment for breach, as in the Information Technology Intermediary Guidelines and Digital Media Ethics Code rules of 2021, several public interest litigations were filed across the country for challenging its validity on the ground that they were suffocating freedom of expression. It has turned into a sophisticated tussle between one party showcasing itself as the harbinger of free speech, and on the other, the government trying to regulate free speech. However, with time, it has become a necessity to have more standardization of free speech on the platforms. Thus argues Professor Srivastav. Also, there should be proper streamlining for the audience to know the regulation on free speech. Interestingly, IT Rules 2021 do these appropriately, and it brings standard regulatory mechanism for free speech with adequate redressal mechanisms as well. This is important. It does not necessarily mean that it is the only mechanism ensuring standardization. Rather, there can be self-regulation by the websites, leading to what we can call as the growth of a private regulation or private constitutionalism. A good example of it can be seen in recent times in the New Zealand Code of Practice for Online Safety and Harms. It is a pact agreed to and signed by tech giants in New Zealand to basically curtail online harmful content. But how far these pacts will be effective is a different question. Interestingly, in 2011, India too had intermediary guidelines providing due diligence to be followed by the social media. Actually, the social media intermediary is a big difference between just individual social media platforms or referring to this genre as the intermediary through which these posts are carried to the public. Now, this meant that the website needs to follow due diligence for ensuring that its platform is not floating harmful content. However, intermediary guidelines of 2011 as compared to intermediary guidelines 2021 were not stringent enough to create real pressure on the workings of these websites, and India saw a plethora of obscene hate speeches content being floated on diverse platforms for close to as much as a decade. As intermediary guidelines 2021 came in, it categorically provides for a time period upon receiving actual knowledge or the complaint. Now, this can be seen in Rule 3 of the Intermediary Guidelines 2021, under which the harmful content needs to be removed. In the absence of any action taken by the concerned intermediary, now refer to Rules 3, 4 and 7 of the Intermediary Guidelines Rules 2021. These are important sections to know if you are interested in the subject. Now, it will lead to removal of, I quote from these guidelines, of safe harbor clause, meaning that the website cannot claim that it is merely a neutral wall on which the content is being posted. Rather, it will be held liable as if the content had been posted by it. Interestingly, this approach of intermediary liability is also being followed in Germany. Its regulation is called Network Enforcement Act. Thus, regulator frameworks across the globe are taking shape, whether in the form of government-endorsed regulations or private body self-regulation or self-constitutionalism. Srivastav concludes, yet what is more important is the element of streamlining these regulations for ensuring that the masses are acquainted with them and thus help in creation of a neutral social media ecosystem. This is your host editor Inderjit Badhwar. Until next time, goodbye for now.
India Legal, stories that count.